Let's start the recording.
It's officially recording now.
I'm really excited to do this and share it.
Yeah, it'd be exciting.
Yeah.
Looks like we have another attendee joining. Welcome.
I know, I was thinking this will be awesome to share and post with everyone, because then finally my mom will have some idea of what I do all day. I don't know how many times I've explained it. It's like, oh yes, something on the internet. Thanks, Mom.
You should have invited her.
That's true. Well, I'll share it with her anyway.
Yeah. So we'll just start and we'll just give a few more minutes to make sure everybody is here, and then we'll get started.
Perfect. All right, I see more folks joining here. It's very exciting. Let me know when you want to kick us off, Diana.
Right. I'm probably just gonna give one more minute. That way we have, in case we have anybody just trying to log into Zoom. Sometimes they're logging in with a personal account or something and it's not going through.
Perfect. And I know you'll mention this again, but for folks that are already on, if you have questions along the way, you guys can just add that to the Q&A and we'll take a look and answer those at the end. So we'll remind folks that join here in the next minute or so, and then we'll get started.
Right. So I think we're good to start. Thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Diana Martinez and I'm the Director of Experiences here at Solid Digital. I'm really excited because today we're gonna be going over our 4th episode, which dives into the process and management of a website project. Our Director of Production, Amber Stansfield, will provide her methods and philosophies pertaining to a successful outcome from a project manager's perspective. We will discuss the characteristics of a collaborative working relationship between agency and client, and then also how to properly strategize a plan and how much time commitment is necessary from the client stakeholders. Additionally, we will provide our own methods to prevent scope creep and the importance of setting and hitting reasonable milestones. And before I introduce Amber, just please remember that if you have any questions, please put those on the Q&A button below and we will be answering those at the end. So here's Amber Stansfield.
Awesome. Thank you, Diana. And thank you all for joining us today. As Diana mentioned, I'm the Director of Production here at Solid Digital. I've also been a project manager myself for over a decade, and I've primarily focused on digital work, but I have managed a really wide variety of projects from, obviously the web and app design and development to e-learning, marketing campaigns, branding, print, trade shows, you name it, I've likely done it. And project management is often a stressful and sometimes thankless job because when a project is managed really well, you hardly notice it, which is an awesome bar to try to hit. But when it's not done well, it becomes really apparent. So being the Director of Production here, I've been able to leverage my experience and all of the mistakes I've made to really help mentor my team and shape the way that we work. So over the years, I've had a lot of opportunities to see what works well and what can really throw a project out of whack. And I know that starting a website redesign is exciting, but it can also be overwhelming and sometimes leave you feeling nervous. But the great news is that when you work with an agency, they'll give you a main point of contact, which is your project manager for the project. And ideally, they should become your new best friend because they're going to work with you all along the way, step by step, to get things done. And I'm excited to share some of what I've learned over the years that I share with my team with you all to help you successfully manage a website redesign of your own, and at the very least try to avoid the mistakes I've made along the way and hopefully take away some tips and tricks here to set you off on the right path. So let's dive in here, and What we're going to cover today, I've broken out into three main areas. So the first is really preparation. And what I mean by that is going to be focused specifically on things that you can do on your end to prepare for an upcoming website redesign. And then we'll dive into tips and tricks to help set clear expectations along the way so that everyone working on the project is on the same page, which is important. And then last, we'll talk about staying on track and look at tips and tricks there to help prevent scope creep and avoid some of the common pitfalls that can occur in projects. And as we look at each of these areas, we'll be sharing some insights on how we work with our clients throughout a website redesign. And we'll also share some tips and tricks that you can apply to any website redesign project, regardless of who you're working with. So first up, we're going to take a look at preparation. And we want to make sure that before that project begins, you're really ready to get off to a good start. So we want to make sure that before you begin, you're taking stock of your current situation. Because believe it or not, I've actually seen projects stall right at the starting line for a wide variety of reasons. So we want to help you avoid this by having a good understanding of the state of what you have, and that'll determine whether or not you're actually ready to move forward. So as you begin that preparation and you're starting to take stock of what you have, you can think about this again in three primary categories, and you'll see a lot of everything in threes here today. So for this one, we're going to be talking about knowledge transfer of any relevant information that can be used to guide the website redesign. We'll touch on some of the digital tools that you're using for your digital marketing efforts that are relevant to the website redesign. And we want to take a look at who on your team is going to be available to work on this project with you and get an idea of how much time they have available. So if we talk about this upfront knowledge transfer, a lot of folks call it like the discovery phase and things like that. Some of the common questions, though, you're going to be asked at the beginning are all very similar. They're going to be things like, do you have any branding information, such as style guide, brand guidelines, target audience, or user personas that you can share? You might be asked about keyword research or available photography. Whatever form this information or these assets take, your agency is likely going to ask you for this. And hopefully you've been following along with our webinars and you've already identified some of these items that an agency is going to need or is going to ask you for. And depending on who you're working with and the scope of your agreement, they may be able to help you create some of these items as part of the project. So like defining user personas or doing some of the keyword research. So keep that in mind. But if you do have some or all of this documentation or guidelines, the important thing is to make sure that they're approved and ready for use. As if they need updated, have a plan to complete that before the website redesign begins, or at least within the time that it's going to be needed. We've had a client recently that we actually started the project. We were all going, everybody was excited. We're on a roll. We got a few weeks into the project, and then they decided to update their branding. So before we could move further into the design phase, we actually had to stop, put the project on hold for 2 months until that rebranding was complete. And that can be really disruptive. If people are in a groove, they're on a roll and everyone's really excited, stopping that, taking a break for a month or two, and then coming back, it's hard to get up and running again and regenerate a lot of that excitement and enthusiasm. Plus a lot of the research and discovery, sometimes folks forget that and it takes time to pick back up again. So that's a good example where taking stock earlier and asking those questions could have helped us put a plan in place ahead of time to avoid that delay. So another big hurdle we sometimes run into can just be accessing the platforms that your team might be using, such as the actual current website that you have, the hosting for it, or things like Google Analytics accounts. And sometimes there's, a technology department that's handling those, or an older agency or development team. So if you don't already have access to these, find out who does and who's able to provide administrative access to those platforms. And that administrative piece is going to be important. And it may sound silly to consider like not being able to access your current website, but I've had a client that took about 3 weeks to track down the original person that had access to their server for the current website. So we could even get in and take a look at see how things were put together and get started. So you want to try to avoid things like that whenever you can by just digging in a little bit in the beginning. So beyond documentation and access to tools, the other often overlooked area is human resources. And what I mean by that is knowing who on your team is available to help and in what capacity they're available. And that will set you up for success. Because a website redesign, it should not be completed in a vacuum by an agency alone. And your involvement is really going to ensure that your needs and expectations are met. And we know and we find that for most of our clients, a website redesign project, it's typically an additional project on top of their already full-time job and all of their daily responsibilities. So if you're able to share that workload with your team, it'll really reduce the time commitment falling on just one person, which can often become a bottleneck for making progress. So take a look at those 3 areas in advance of starting a website redesign, and that'll help you and your team get off to a really good start as you're beginning this process. So let's assume you've taken stock, you're feeling ready, you guys are excited to move forward. Once you get going on the project, setting clear expectations throughout that project, especially around communication and collaboration between the teams, that can be the difference between a really fun and easy project or one that can be really stressful and difficult to complete, that can be kind of confusing and filled with tension. And we definitely want you to avoid that and go for the fun, easy version. It's way better. So, in my opinion, in kind of working through a lot of these projects, I think one of the most important pieces of a website redesign is just having a really clear understanding of what is included in the scope of agreement between you and the agency you're working with. And in most cases, and hopefully this is it, you've been a part of that process, working with an agency to define your needs and outline that scope of work. But I know that everyone approaches this differently. So within our sales process, we spend a lot of times with our clients asking questions to make sure there's no confusion on scope. Occasionally, we find that the final scope that we end up defining together is often different than the initial request that we get coming in from clients that we're asked to estimate. But we find that this new version that we've spent time putting together, it often meets the goals of our clients and their organization a little bit better. So don't be afraid to work with that agency, ask lots of questions. And once you have that defined, it's really important that both you and your team read through that signed contract and that everyone is clear on the scope of work, the steps that are going to be taken to complete that work, and then what happens when changes to scope or the timeline occur, because they often do. And if you're not clear, then now is the time to ask more questions. All right, so once the initial planning is complete for a project, we want to make sure that everyone is really clear on those big milestones, the timelines, and the roles and responsibilities for everyone involved. And those should be really clear and easy to find at any time throughout the project. Those milestones, they're going to provide those guidelines that you need to check in at key points of the project to keep on track. And that's where your project manager that I mentioned early on, they're going to be your new best friend, because part of their role is to really ensure that everybody involved in the project understands what's expected of them, what's next, and that everybody has what they need to move forward. So don't be afraid to ask questions and use them, because they should be your guide throughout the project. So again, right from the start, it's going to be really important to set also clear and consistent communication expectations, because it's hard enough to understand all of the complexities that go into a website redesign. But if you aren't even sure where to find information about what's happening next, or don't know where or when or how to ask questions, it's going to be really difficult to make progress throughout the project. So set consistent times to check in, go over the current status of the project, go over any open items, talk about your questions and next steps, and that'll keep everybody aligned And it's going to provide opportunity to discuss any items that will require closer collaboration. And I will say just having those conversations on their own are not enough, because I can hardly remember everything that I discussed in my 2 p.m. meeting last Tuesday. I can hardly remember what date it is sometimes. And I think probably most of you are in a similar boat with COVID. The days just feel the same. So dedicate a clear and easy to access location where those status updates and all those decisions that were made, that'll provide a go-to resource to keep the team aligned. Especially, if it's on an off day, you're working on things and other people aren't around, you want your team and yourself to be able to find that information when you need it. All right, so I mentioned this a little bit, this close collaboration, but beyond those regular status updates throughout a project, there are a few other key points where that close collaboration between teams is going to be essential. And most often that's going to be in the beginning of the website redesign. And at that point, it's really important to involve any stakeholders that either want or need to have input into how the new site's built. And write this down, because doing this is going to save you money, I promise. If you're able to get everyone's input early, it's going to help create a plan that incorporates their needs. And we have a lot of clients, we'll talk about this early on, and they're just not sure who to involve. So start these conversations with your team now. And we typically find that, most of our clients, they'll involve people from their leadership team, their internal marketing, often it's sales or human resources, or even customer service. They're often involved in that initial planning phase because they need to get something out of the website. So doing that, you'll make sure that their expectations for the new site are included right from the beginning. Because if you don't do that and get their input until, say, later, I have a lot of clients that are like, well, they're really visual, they want to see the design, and we'll bring them in then. If you wait, you may need to go back and redo parts of the site or change decisions that have already been made in that planning phase. And doing that is going to cost you more money, and it's going to extend your timeline. So we've had really great success with clients that have included their CEO. And I know as I say that, I schedule meetings a lot. I know that's difficult. Their time is booked and it is valuable, and it's hard to get them locked down. But we, again, find a lot of great success when we're able to include them along with any key stakeholders in our upfront discovery phase. That collaboration, it really provides the space for those stakeholders, and especially the CEO, to really share their vision and their goals for the project. It really helped generate a lot of excitement for both our team and our client's team. And it got everyone aligned initially, which made the rest of the project run really smoothly. So be prepared for that initial planning and knowledge transfer between teams and the agency that you're working with. It can be time consuming, but if you're able to provide clear and accurate information, and you can do that quickly and your team is on the same page, it's going to take up a lot less of everyone's time. It's also going to help create a really clear plan for the site with less confusion, and it's going to reduce the likelihood of scope changes or delays to that timeline down the line. So now that we've covered some of the initial preparation you can do and some tips and tricks on setting clear expectations for a project, let's take a look at some tips and tricks to help you guys stay on track. Because I know that's a difficult area. I know it's an area where a lot of people have questions and concerns. So if you aren't familiar with the triple constraints of project management, it's pretty simple. The theory is that the main 3 constraints to managing a project are time, budget, and quality. So these are typically the categories that are going to be used to analyze and manage the project, but they're often competing with each other. So if one is increased a little bit, one or both of the others are typically decreased. And I'll give you some examples of those. If you have like a fast and hard deadline, you might need to simplify areas of the site. You might have to focus on, what's necessary versus what is nice to have. And for example, maybe if you want a site with animations and a lot of movement, you might need to simplify or reduce that, or focus on, 1 or 2 areas and do those well, but make the rest of the site a little simpler to get through and keep on track and meet those deadlines. And so if you're able to understand and communicate your limitations on any of those three areas, it'll really help you and the project team course correct when needed. So when things come up and you need to make decisions, knowing what's most important to you is going to help find the right solution. So we'll talk about these a little more here, and we're going to start with what I like to call the fun one, because it's not. There's just no beating around the bush here. Budget is often really difficult to discuss and manage. And this is where having those clear expectations of what's in scope, how scope changes are handled is going to be really important. It's also an area where good intentions to save money, sometimes they just don't work out as expected. So for example, a lot of clients want to take on the responsibility of copywriting, believing that this will save them money. However, this can sometimes be time consuming and overwhelming if your team is not equipped to handle this. And in most cases, we find that this copywriting delivery is the primary reason for a delay in a website redesign project. So on the flip side, the benefit of actually taking it on with your team is that they should be the subject matter experts in your business and on your offerings. They're going to know that better than an agency or someone that you hire from outside. But the downside is that those folks, they're not copywriters. Most people don't have a copywriter on staff. And if they do, they don't always have the available time or the expertise in creating compelling SEO-rich copy. So you want the copy to be interesting and you want it to work hard for you by adding in all those keywords. So there's a lot of pros and cons on either side, but it is time consuming. And I think the most important element of it is just discuss it early and discuss it often with your team and your agency. And that's going to ensure that you know where your gaps are and everyone has a plan in place to deliver quality content when it's needed to meet those project deadlines that you're working with. So aside from the budget, I find like timelines are typically the next critical element of a project to balance. And they're usually either fixed, like hard deadlines that you cannot exceed, or they're flexible. So keep in mind, just with a project timeline, it is a best guess. It is based on past experience, but no two projects or teams are ever going to be alike. And so along with that content and asset creation piece, the other area to keep an eye on here and create the space for, or just be aware of, are those milestones where your team needs to provide feedback. Because those ones are an absolute guess, right? Nobody knows how much feedback there's going to be, how long it's going to take to apply. So one, you want to make sure that your team has time to talk about it and know that it might be flexible if there's more feedback than expected. And so that's where I tend to look at that one as another area that can derail a project if it's not handled well. But I've got some tips and tricks for you guys. So typically an agency is going to walk you through what they've done and provide reasoning for some of those big decisions that have been made before they turn it over to your team to review and provide feedback. So this is another one of those areas where involving your key stakeholders during that presentation so they can hear the reasons that things have been implemented the way they have been. And also involving them in those feedback discussions, like your team as a group, is really important the first time. Because there's usually more than one round of revisions included in projects. So I will say this is one of the other most important things I like to share with our clients is that we see a lot of success when our clients are able to gather everyone on their team that's necessary. Hear that presentation with all those reasons and have a good conversation to create consensus around a complete first round of feedback. So gather everything that you can, and I'm even talking about mobile and browser, responsive feedback. Get it all in the first round, and then just use those remaining rounds to add final polish, but not introduce new feedback. And the reason I say that is because if you add something new in the last round of feedback, more often than not, every one of those items is not going to be applied perfectly. There may be some misconfusion or, some limitations in what can be done. And if you had new items in that round and they don't meet your expectations, what's going to happen is you're going to end up adding more rounds of revisions that are going to increase that budget and that timeline. So that is one of the most important areas, I think, if you take away to focus on and really gain that consensus that's needed there. So the last item we're going to take a look at is quality. And in my experience, this is really an area that's difficult to define compared to budget and timelines, which can usually be more specific. It's often an area that's most unclear within the scope of work, but it can have a large impact on a project. And when I'm talking about quality, I promise you, I don't intend anyone ever going in and saying, nah, I don't really want a high quality site. I'm okay with a crappy one, and that's not what we mean. But it helps to think of these in terms of design or functionality, for an example. So thinking of design, and we'll use an image for an example. So just inserting a plain square image is going to take a lot less effort than taking that same square image, adding a color treatment, a border, and exporting a round image to use on the site. But you could say both of them are just adding an image to a page, right? But the effort required is going to be different for either option. So functionality is the same way. It can scale from simple and easy to really complex, and it can be time consuming. So it's very similar to that triple constraints theory, where spending extra time on a particular area of the site is likely going to mean simplifying something else. So making decisions here can really impact both the budget and the timeline of the project. So just have clear communication around those key decision points and understand the impact to the project. And that'll help you stay on track with the current project constraints. But it's also a really good opportunity to note areas for future improvements that may just not be possible to add in now, but could be added in at a later time. So what we want to always encourage is, we love hearing all the great ideas and all the feedback that everyone has, because there's often a lot of really good information or ideas that come out of this phase. So with our clients, we typically capture all of that information, and even if we can't apply it now, we'll save it for the end of the project. And what we like to say is we'll talk about this as a phase 2. So after the current site's live, we're going to go back to that list, and we're going to go back through and see what's still relevant, because things change. We're going to prioritize what is exciting and relevant that we want to add later. And we're going to plan out, updates to the site down the line in small chunks, so that at some point we can add in these ideas that people are really excited about, that are really going to benefit the site. So my hope is that by now you're not afraid, but feeling really excited and ready to begin a website redesign, and that you have some idea of what you can do to take stock early, prepare your assets and your team in advance. And once you get started, I hope you've gathered some tips and tricks you can use to set those clear expectations and avoid some of these common obstacles that can arise within a website redesign project. All right, thank you all so much for joining us. I hope you gathered some tips that will help set up your next website redesign for success. And I know we have some questions here, so I want to save some time to dig in a little bit deeper and help answer any questions that you guys have and set you guys off. So Diana, do we have anything that you want to run through?
Yeah, thank you, Amber. So there were a couple of questions that came in while you were doing your presentation. The first one was, what are some of the things you do to ensure that projects are successful with your clients?
Oh, I like this one. One of the things that we do, and it might just sound simple, but I find it's overlooked a lot, is we create time and space on a very regular basis. So monthly, we do this with our clients as we go through projects. We reach out and send a quick survey to everybody on the project team. We want to know how they're feeling. Are they feeling that our team is working well? Is the process running smoothly? Are they informed all along the way? Do they know what to expect? And just make sure that, our clients' needs are being met, and our teams as well. Because a lot of times, people will just let things go and they may not bring them up, and you might not have any idea of what's going on, but just simply reaching out and asking for that candid feedback in an effort to help improve the process is going to make a lot of difference. So I think that's one thing specifically that we do that I find really valuable to gauge how we're doing working with our customers. And it creates that opportunity to have those conversations and make improvements for things that aren't working well or could be better.
Absolutely. Communication is key. Another question that came in is that you mentioned copywriting was difficult. Can you share some tips to make it easier?
Yes, I think it's really the effort is underestimated a lot. And I know I talk about a lot about, the effort, how overwhelming it can be, but I think some tips and tricks to avoid that are really starting early and often, which I know is hard because I feel like there's this chicken and egg thing, right? Where people feel like they can't write the copy, not knowing what the design is going to look like and how much copy they need to write in all the areas. And at the same time, the designers are wondering, well, what am I supposed to design if I don't know what copy needs to go on the page? And so it really is a little bit of a step-by-step and a working together with that process. And I think the earlier you start, there are some basic simple things that everybody typically is going to need, right? Everyone is going to need a short blurb, sentence or so, two maybe, that explains who the company is and what you do. Right? That can be started before a website redesign. I think taking stock of copy, if you have a current website, how outdated is it? How much do you want to change? What's missing? So you know what needs to be created. If you can start any of those things early, that's going to be helpful. Some other areas would be, additional blog posts, things like that. If you have team bios, chasing down, 20 to 50 people to get a bio for the website can be time consuming. So starting that early can help you get a jump on that. Same thing with portfolio or case studies. A lot of times there's multiples of those. Often they need updated or you want to create new, fresher ones. So those things can often be started without having a clear understanding of what the design is going to look like. And that'll get some of those just heavy lifting items out of the way. And then just don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to start. It doesn't have to be perfect and you can change it along the way. So if you start that early, you can give a draft of an area to your agency team and have them take a look. They'll give you feedback and say, hey, this is awesome. Can you write a little more? Or can you write a little less? Or can it be a bullet list? Or, they'll give you recommendations. And that's where I think that back and forth collaboration early on will help get people started, and it will start those conversations to get you a little bit closer as you go.
Thank you, Amber. So those are all the questions we have time for today. Webinar number 4. Thank you so much for everybody that attended today to listen to Amber and all the wonderful tips that she has for us. We really appreciate you joining us, and please stay tuned for webinar number 5, which will be coming up on April 28th. We are going to be focusing on launch days, keys to success. Don't worry, be happy. So we are going to be sending out an email with some more information on that webinar. And thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.